There's a cliche coming, boys. It has something to do with mild wind and a slight drizzle, perhaps a dash of lightning and loud noises. Maziski, the legend, informs us that a storm is indeed coming in the form of his Ultimate Lighting 2.0, which is a mod I used a ton in my Warhammer 2 replays, and it will set the stage nicely here in the sequel as the High Elves and Bretonnians do battle in the balance overhaul and bug fix build by ODM Loopy. RTK Umayas controls the Azur, Butcher Bird controls the Frenchman, and will do his best to ensure this muddy field doesn't turn into another Agincourt. But to be fair, the mounted nobles who fought against Henry V had been superheroes, they probably would not have drowned in the dirt. As you'd expect from a balance overhaul mod, there are some changes to both armies, but generally speaking, they are pretty reserved along the same lines of how CA would patch if they ever did. If they didn't take 8 months to make minor stat changes or leave units useless for several years. But hey, King Louen's leading the army with better stats and his sword now removing charge defense from enemies, supported by a damsel with Earthblood and Dwellers Below, 2 Trebs in the back of the army, tons of peasant bowmen and men-at-arms, and 3 Grail Knights, the armored, elite, and mounted core of Couronne. They have 6 more bonus versus large, up from 12 to 18, 2 more AP and 10 more armor, so a nice little buff for one of Bretonnia's coolest units, and cannot wait to see how they perform in this one. Still think their heraldry issue's been resolved in this mod. Spreading the field very wide, I'm going to try and force the High Elves to split up on the approach, then run them down with their superior knights, but Umayas has other ideas, I am sure, with a White Lion Corps led by the Puremain Company, who have lost their armor sundering and now have 12 bonus first large. White Lions are a really good choice for Bretonnia because they will beat basically all their infantry and do a lot of damage back to charging knights while being resistant to missile fire. Now, a very interesting strat here, there are actually 2 metal mages on the field, both with Plague of Rust, and the idea behind that is that you get a lot more coverage and spammability with the minus armor. And you can anchor both your flanks with a character that has it. Especially with Grail Knights now having 100 armor, being able to reduce that back down to 40 anywhere and anytime, pretty big deal. So the Archmage can use that and Searing Doom while being sneaky and invisible with the Armor of the Stars, and wherever she is not, that is where the Foot Mage will be, to help turn the cav fight by debuffing the Grail Knights. That's the idea anyway. Rarely ends up being that simple. Now, Martial Prowess and Harmony for Cathay grant different bonuses to ranged and melee units rather than a one-size-fits-all approach. In the case of High Elf melee units, they move faster now with Martial Prowess. A lot of the melee infantry now moving at 36 speed, and Illyrian Reavers moving at 99, which is a noticeable improvement for them. So with 2 Silver Helms and 4 Illyrian Reavers, a lot of cav to try and slow down the rampage of the Grail Knights. We'll see if they can trade into them, now that the Grail Knights have an additional 6 bonus versus large. 18 BVL is a pretty big deal too. Now, Grail Knights are cool, but Trebs are cooler. Infinitely more respectable than the lowly Catapult. These bad boys can hurl 90 kilogram projectiles well over 300 meters, and for the Azur, well, that spells bad news. Elven bodies are frail things, and when large boulders are being yeeted into their ranks, they tend to break down a bit. Archmage dropping a torrent of molten metal. Searing Doom can be pretty useful against stationary emplacements, but nothing doing on that cast though. And here comes the main assault. Pure melee rush from the elves in this one. Not super common. You'll typically see at least some range play, and if nothing else, a few Illyrian Reaver archers, but just pure light cavalry, CQB melee cav in this situation, and White Lions already touching home with the men-at-arms while the Grail Knights pour in from the flanks. Silver Helms will want to steer clear of them for now. For the moment, they will content themselves with butchering a bunch of the peasants in the front ranks. Get through those real quick. Don't waste your time with the White Lions trying to cut through them. You'll get a lot more value just charging in with the Silver Helms. The great melee stats and charge bonus. The Silver Helms can deal with the more heavily armored men-at-arms. Once you're through with that, push on to the peasant bowmen, crump them, and you're going to be looking pretty good. But of course, Grail Knights are waiting in reserve, at least the ones on the back right of the Bretonnian army, and they're waiting for a good opportunity to countercharge into the Silver Helms. Now, if you are the High Elves here, then Plague of Rust set up with an Illyrian Reaver charge might not be a bad idea if you can follow up closely behind with a Silver Helm charge. Those two in tandem would probably be able to trade pretty well into the Grail Knights. We're seeing a Plague of Rust overcast now, taking their armor from 100 down to 40, and I'm going to be very curious to see how the Illyrian Reavers trade here. I don't think they'll do well in this fight, but it might not be absolutely horrendous for them now that the Grail Knights are actually losing a few models due to that armor value being negated so heavily. Very nice dodge on the Dwellers Below as well, dragging the Bretonnians through their own cast. We'll get a better look at it when the damsel casts it in a few seconds here in real time. Yeah, the Illyrian Reavers are actually killing a few models on the Grail Knights, which is impressive. We see the dwellers below from the Damsel Lore of Life caster, and immediately the Azure Spears will retreat. They're going to take a lot of damage, but they are going to drag the men-at-arms and peasants through that vortex, and all of them are going to take a little bit of a beating. They're not quite as powerful as Pit of Shades or some of those vortexes were pre-patch. Still be nasty though. Not sure that vortex in particular was worth it for Bretonnia. Now, Plague of Rust being used really well here. Second Grail Knight over on the other side of the field. This is why you bring the double caster, right? Wouldn't be able to pull this off if you only had one. Archmage is on a Great Eagle. She has a lot of mobility, but she can't cast 2 spells at a single time, at least not on opposite sides of the field. And there is a big difference between Grail Knights with 100 armor and Grail Knights with 40 armor. Another Searing Doom, this time catching out some peasant bowmen. Grail Knights don't really want to be charging into white lines, and this is the downside of having them as a backline sweeper unit, and why you want to bring white lions if you are the Azure. Once they cut their way through men-at-arms and are into the back line, Grail Knights don't relish the idea of charging them straight up. That's true of most armored great weapon infantry, of course, but doubly so for units like the Pure Main Company now, who have innate bonus first large. So Louen on his Hippogriff will need to start doing some heavy lifting for the Bretonnians, which is something he's well accustomed to doing, of course. Great Eagle, perhaps about to get caught out by the Grail Knights. That'd be a huge pick for Bretonnia to get a full surround off on her. Looking like she might have the mobility to escape there. A lot of the peasant bowmen have been swarmed, inundated, cut to pieces by this Azure Rush. Plague of Rust again overcast from the Foot Mage this time, and the Grail Knights are coming in to support King Louen. And this is the kind of engagement that Bretonnia actually does want. Now, Grail Knights can't stick around in that fight for too long, of course, especially when their armor is reduced to 40, but in that kind of situation where King Louen is providing the anvil, the Grail Knights are going to be the hammer coming in from behind. That is pretty much perfect and textbook Bretonnian play. If you can get 1 or 2 cycle charges in there, might be able to turn this entire flank in Bretonnia's favor. And King Louen is going to be very difficult for this High Elf army to deal with. They don't have a single entity or a lot of firepower to chunk him down. Really, the best way to deal with him is ignore him and leave him for late game, where mass white lions, if they still exist by that point, might be able to cut through Beaky's roguish good looks. This is a situation where not having regrowth could come back to bite Bretonnia a little bit here. Not having some overcast healing for the Grail Knights will mean they might start losing these battles of attrition with enough cycle charges into the White Lions, into the Pure Main Company, into the Azure Spears. There's really no infantry here. They love the idea of charging in a straight-up engagement, which again is why Louen has to do a great job of providing that anvil, because they're quickly running out of bodies on the front line in terms of infantry. Double unit of Grail Knight piling in to take out the Archmage, but Searing Doom will force them out and kill maybe 4 or 5 knights, so pretty well timed cast there. Earthbloods will of course still provide some healing for Bretonnia, but not quite the burst healing that Regrowth would normally provide. To be fair, I'm unsure if Regrowth was nerfed at all in this battle balance overhaul, so there are definitely elements of both these factions that I'm probably not aware of, so just keep that in mind. They probably know more about what's going on here in terms of mod changes than I do. What I do know for sure, beyond a shadow of a doubt, is that Plague of Rust has hounded these Grail Knights into an early grave. At least one full unit of Grail Knights has been dispatched now, and it is almost entirely due to the fact that minus 60 armor has continuously debuffed them throughout the course of this battle. That is really difficult for the Grail Knights to deal with, because it means even regular High Elf spears will be chunking them down every time they charge into melee. We even saw Illyrian Reavers, just regular light cav, trading okay into them. It's not normally a situation Grail Knights would have any issue with whatsoever. But King Louen is still a force, and he is still full HP. That is the big question the High Elves have to answer here: how to deal with King Louen. Butcher Bird has isolated the Foot Mage. The Lore of Metal caster is in dire straits at the moment. This would be a pretty important pick here. Now, she's probably already gotten her value out simply by casting all those Plague of Rust in situations where the Archmage would not have been able to cast them. With that said, taking that Encourage aura off the field, preventing more Plague of Rust, simply evening out that balance bar could be really nice. And the Grail Knights just hounded to the edges of the map. Silverhelm showing zero mercy whatsoever. You can see a pile of dead Illyrian Reavers there next to the unit cards, but Archmage and the remnants of the High Elf army over on the Bretonnian right flank, or what used to be the Bretonnian right flank, will be making their way back towards the center of the battlefield to deal with King Louen and the remnants of these Grail Knights. And it's the damsel's time to shine, baby, into CQB. She will show her worth, her might, her magic, and decapitate at least a handful of these Azure Spears. Grail Knights will be forced to retreat. Again, not wanting to stay too long in prolonged combat in sustained melee with High Elf Spears. You can see what happens when they do. But King Louen is on the hunt. He's not going to be able to catch that Archmage. She can run for days. There's really no threat to her at all. The way you kill her is, again, kill her army and force her into a melee type situation. Now, very nice from the Bretonnians here. They have a trebuchet back online, continuing to pound the High Elf infantry. Kill those white lions, kill those spears. Might be able to turn things. It's definitely in favor of the Azure right now. Slight advantage on the balance bar, and perhaps more than a slight advantage in terms of what remains of their armies, simply because there's so many white lions still on the field. King Louen, I don't think he can kill all those white lions, especially now with the Pure Main Company there all by himself. So the trebuchet will play an important role here moving deeper into this game. But if you're Bretonnia in this situation, you definitely like the idea of compartmentalizing these engagements, taking them one at a time and not allowing the High Elves to pile in and get all their force into a cohesive group. Because once they all link up, you're in big time trouble. When they're isolated like this, then King Louen can swoop in, cause some terror routes, and generally be a beast that he's so well known for. Another Searing Doom on the trebuchet. Have not been overly impressed with how much damage it does to the artillery crews. So while it's probably worth casting, doesn't seem to like kill them outright or anything. It hasn't really shut down the trebuchets in any way, shape, or form up to this point. Sword of Corone removing charge defense against large, so King Louen dumping right into the center of everything. Minus 24 melee defense, minus 30 armor. It even removes expert charge defense, which is really cool. I like that addition. I don't know how much that affects flying monsters like Louen when he charges in, because I don't know if units can actually brace against flying troops. I know that if you're a cav unit charging in from the ground, yeah, you can brace and you'll completely nullify charge bonus. Don't know if that's true for something flying like King Louen, especially considering it can just strike from a flank or the rear all the time anyway, where it definitely won't kick in. Nice rollers below on the White Lions here. It's a big time cast. White Lions didn't quite pile in the way that I think Bretonnia wanted. Could have maybe one-shot a couple units there, but I think Umayya's avoided the worst of those effects. Bretonnia's big question here is still, how the hell do you deal with the Pure Main Company? You've just been stomping everything they've touched so far. Now, I think Bretonnia, for the most part, has avoided fighting them, and I think that's pretty smart. Again, all that bonus was large on a unit with 54 melee attack base. Huge problem for Grail Knights, huge problem for King Louen. They can't shoot him. They don't really have any infantry to throw into the meat grinder against them at this point. So I think King Lowen's best bet is to go after the leadership, which is exactly what he's going to do here. Go after the Metal Mage. Finish her off. She's got 1100 HP. Getting a bit unlucky in terms of the attacks. I think he probably should have already been able to kill her, considering how much time he spent trying to. But she's on foot, so she has the benefit of getting knocked over. The invulnerability state for a little bit can make a pretty big difference. But if nothing else, this has been an absolute clinic in terms of how to use Plague of Rust on high-value targets. Don't typically see the dual mage strat where they're using the exact same spell, just using debuffs. Honestly, for much of Warhammer 3's lifecycle, we've been focused on more of the damage output. We've seen the Pit of Shades, the Pendulums in the early days of it, of course. But debuff spells certainly have their place, and they have made a gigantic impact in this one. Constant uptime, constant cast from the Archmage and the Foot Mage, and it really hurt the Grail Knights, and it's starting to hurt King Louen now too. To be fair, he's still basically full HP. But with the Pure Main Company piling in, even though the Sword of Corone is active, and they're minus 24 defense and minus 30 armor, he's gonna have to stick in the fight here. He can't cycle charge forever. Balance bar is swinging even more in favor of the Azure. and I think this is going to be King Louen's last stand. We're now starting to see that HP not really hold up to the same extent, and once the damage starts outstripping the regen, then you know King Louen is in trouble, especially when he's forced to dive in to the center of a bunch of armor-piercing, shock-wielding elite of the Phoenix King. And it is a foregone conclusion at this point. This will be the last stand of the Lionheart. Now, I think the High Elves had an army that was really well suited for countering what the Bretonnians were going to try and do. The Grail Knights are buffed, so they're going to be really nice in this battle balance overhaul. I think we're going to see them a lot for Bretonnia, especially if we continue to cover the mod. They're a fantastic unit, but in this situation, I think White Lions proved to be a very potent core. One that I think Bretonnia didn't really have too many answers for. In an ideal situation, what you do is you have King Louen charge in alongside some men-at-arms, pin them down, then have the Grail Knights come in from behind. But there was so much light cav, very effective light cav on the High Elf side, and we saw those Illyrian Reavers really cause a lot of problems for the Peasant Bowmen in the rear, and even tie down the Grail Knights and trade okay into them. I think all the Illyrian Reavers got at least decentish damage value. If they're getting like 400 value against Grail Knights, that's totally worth it, especially if they're tying down Peasant Bowmen, causing some havoc in the back line too. That in turn opens things up for the Silver Helms, and then of course with the White Lions, who all had, most of them had over 100 kills there. But I mean, Plague of Rust is really, I think, the total game changer in that fight. I think that took what should have been a very tanky unit, 100 armor on elite knights, hard to kill, hard to cut through, but when they have 40 armor, they are squish balls, and we kind of saw it there. None of the Grail Knights did bad. 1400 value on 2 of them, other one did just fine, but that's the thing for Bretonnia in this situation. They can't do just fine. They can't even just do good. They have to carry. There's not a lot of killing power elsewhere. Peasant Bowmen can't shoot down White Lions with their missile resist, so you're really relying on King Louen, the Trebs, and the Grail Knights to do all of your killing in the situation, and when Grail Knights have 40 armor, they just can't carry. So it's just a really well thought out build from the High Elves.